Welcome back everyone. For today's video we are once again back with more of the educational speedrun. So without further ado, let's jump right into the action and start a 10-minute rapid game.
Zooming through the game with the bomb cloud start, trashing all your prep like it's modern art. Night on the rim, he'll still find the win. Chat's going wild, bro thinks he's Hikaru again. Oh hey hey, he's smurfing play-by-play, beats you blindfolded, still sipping latte. Queens are flying, eagles meet defeat. Just another speed run on Hikaru Street.
Alright, so first game, here we go. Now I'm going to start with the move E4. As I've said, there are many different openings. At this point, it's mostly about reinforcing the concepts. I will try when possible to introduce some intermediate concepts here. It's not going to be so easy because we're still only around the 700 level, so a lot of people are going to blunder in the opening phase. Many of the intermediate and advanced concepts start to occur when the players survive the first phase without any issues. Okay, so we get E4, E5. Now I do believe Vienna, very strong choice. I'm going to go back to basics with knight f3. Now if my opponent plays the move knight to c6 in this position, I'm going to go for a new line. The opening setup that I'm going to go for here is the move c3, intending to play the move d4. Now this is what is known as the Ponziani, where white tries to claim the center right away. Opponent goes knight f6. Now the reason this opening is a little bit tricky to play is that when your opponent plays the move knight to f6 attacking the pawn, you're not supposed to guard the pawn. Now one of the basic principles, which I've pointed out many times already, is development. Get the pieces developed, castle your king. Obviously look for your opponent's pieces, whether they can be captured or they're defended, but also your pieces, whether they're defended as well. So Ponziani is a little bit of a tricky opening from that standpoint, because if your opponent plays the move knight to f6, here you're actually going to ignore the pawn and play the move d4. Now what I will say about this opening is that if you do study this correctly, this should not be an issue, because you'll know that you're supposed to play d4, but don't simply play this move c3 if you have not studied the variation. So we get the move pawn takes pawn. Now if I were to capture this pawn on d4, then black will simply capture this pawn on e4. So therefore I'm going to play the move e5. My knight guards the pawn and the pawn targets the horse. Opponent goes queen e7. Very logical move here. It's not a very good move objectively, but it's good to see someone at this level playing such a move. Now this move stops me from taking the knight here with the pawn, as my king would be captured, and black is also threatening to simply capture this pawn on e5. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to look at this. I can't move this pawn. So what do I do? Well, what I can do here to guard this pawn on e5 is simply capture with the pawn. Now I have the big white center, the two pawns connect, the knight guards everything, and I can follow up this pawn capture by moving the bishop and castling the king. Now this is an opening. Again, if you've studied it, you should play it. If you watch this video and you're like, oh man, I'm just going to play this opening, I do not recommend it, because it is very tricky and you have to know exactly what to do. Now if you know what to do in the first 5 to 10 moves, you'll get a completely acceptable position, you'll get a game to play, but you need to study this. This is not an opening you can just watch for 5 seconds and simply go for it. So we get the move d6. Now my opponent is overloading this pawn here. You'll notice he has 1, 2, 3 pieces attacking the pawn, and I have 1, 2 guarding. So 3 is greater than 2, so black is now threatening to capture this pawn and win some material. So the move I'm going to play here is I'm going to think about this. Well, bishop f4, logical move, guards the pawn. Queen e2, logical move, guards the pawn. But the move that I'm going to play here is this move bishop to b5 instead, as now black is only attacking this pawn with the pawn and the queen, as the bishop is pinned to the, or the knight is pinned to the king. So this move bishop b5, I think I mentioned this in a previous video, but the notion of a pin, whether it's the bishop pinning a knight on c6 or bishop g4 pinning the knight on f3 or bishop g5, this will occur, I would say, with very high probability in beginner games, probably 80% plus, maybe 90. I'm not a statistics major, so I can't be certain of whether what I'm saying is correct, but it will occur with a lot of frequency, the concept of a pin. So we get bishop d7, logical move. He breaks the pin of the knight to the king, and once again black is now attacking with the pawn, the knight, and the queen. So black is attacking with 3 and I'm guarding with 2, but here what I can actually do, I think I can do it, I'm not actually sure, is I wanted to castle my king here, finish the development, because after takes queen e5, I have the move rook to e1, but that probably isn't great. So this is already in the vein of intermediate opening. Probably not the best choice to go for this, because if you play this and you get to this position, you're very likely going to blunder from the white side. In fact, I think both sides are very ripe to make blunders here at this level. What I'm going to do is I am going to castle. I'm going to finish my development very quickly. Nothing Nothing should be under attack. I don't think. I can take back, and after takes queen e5, I have to move rook to e1. Although I did just realize after knight takes pawn, we're not going to be able to follow the super basic principles here. If I were to take this knight, there's bishop takes bishop. So the move I'm going to play is I'm going to trade the bishops. Now if black takes back with the knight, I have to move rook to e1, putting pressure on the queen due to this pin. If black takes with this knight, after takes and rook e1, as you're about to see, black is lagging very, very far behind in development. You'll notice you have 1, 2, 3, 4 pieces which have not moved. Takes with the knight. Okay, so now I'm going to trade the knight. If black captures with the queen, I have rook to e1, which will win material, so he captures with the knight. Very, very good move. Now, as I said, you'll notice that both sides haven't developed the pieces super quickly, but white's pieces are coming out very quickly here, and black cannot castle the king. So the move that I'm going to play is rook to e1, and here I have many threats now. I can play pawn to f4, I can go bishop to f4, and there's tons of pressure towards the queen. So now I will play the move f4 here. If black moves the knight, then I win the queen. If black plays the move rook to d8, I'm going to move the queen. I'm not quite sure where, but I am going to win this knight or the queen on the file. Now this might be a little bit more intermediate and advanced for most of you guys who are complete beginners watching the video. This is the reason I don't recommend this opening unless you've studied it, although to have some fun here with the meme, I do believe this is the opening that the very famous streamer Dr. Lupo used in the recent PogChamps, so it's got to be good. So I played knight to d2 here. If black moves the knight, I capture the queen. If he checks, I slide the king, and it still doesn't matter because the knight can't move as black would lose the king. So I'm going to win this knight. I'm going to be ahead in material, and most importantly, black still has not finished the development as black has been unable to castle. So we're waiting for a move here from my opponent. Let's see what he chooses to play. Plays queen b4. Now he is attacking this pawn on f4, but I can simply capture the knight. Again, looking at the material, the rook attacks the knight, but the bishop and the queen guard it. So because both these pieces guard, I'm not worried about the knight, and here I simply am free to take the horse. So I capture the horse. Black's still behind in development. These three pieces are not in the game, and meanwhile I haven't developed the rook and the bishop here, but this king is super weak in the center. Now I do give my opponent a lot of credit. He is losing the game here, but he's found some moves that I think if you were playing someone around 600 level, it's very likely he would have won. So now what I'm doing is I'm going to take the pawn. The rook prevents black from capturing with the bishop. He takes back, and now black is one move away from castling the king. Now, as I mentioned in an earlier speedrun video, when your opponent pushes a pawn on the f file, one thing you should always be cognizant of if the king has not castled out of the center is, are there ways to attack the king on this diagonal? Now in this case, I do have the free square. Black has nothing to block on the diagonal, so the king is going to have to move here. Again, if your opponent plays an f6 or an f5 very early with the king on e8, you should always be aware of this queen h5 idea. If your opponent has a pawn on g7 and they can go g6, for example, say I could take a pawn just to illustrate. I can't of course put a pawn on g6, but if you go like this and you could put a pawn here, it would be fine for black. But you should always be aware of whether there's a way for your opponent to cut down the diagonal if they push this f pawn forward. So we get king to d7. Now my opponent is trying to manually castle his king. He's trying to run his king to the queen side here. I am not going to let him. I'm going to check the king. I don't want this king to get to safety here on this side of the board, so I'm going to force the king to stay in the middle. We get to move king to e8, and now what I'm going to do is try to finish my development. Now the way I try to do that is I'm going to play knight to f3. My knight guards the rook from being captured, and now this bishop can move on the diagonal, and then I can bring my other rook to the center of the board. Now the big issue here for my opponent is the rook can't be developed. I'm moving the bishop out. All my pieces have perfect harmony here, while black's king is stuck in this middle, and on top of that, black is missing a piece here, which also makes this significantly worse. Now the Ponziani opening is an opening that I did play against Magnus Carlsen some time ago in the London Chess Classic, so it is a relatively stable opening, but it does require some knowledge. Okay, so now we get this move pawn to h5 being played here. My opponent is trying to develop the pawn, and here I could check the king. I could take the pawn. Actually, taking the pawn would lose the game, but I don't want to be fancy. Remember, we have an extra piece with the knight. Black king is stuck in the middle of the board, so the main thing that I want to do here is finish my development. So I'm going to go bishop to f4. Now you might be thinking, well, it hangs the pawn on b2, and indeed it does hang the pawn, but I'm not really worried since I have an extra knight. But also after queen takes pawn, at the very least I can recapture this pawn on c7 to even out the pawn situation. So okay, my opponent does play the move queen takes b2 here. I can take the pawn, but remember here that even though I can take the pawn, this king is in the middle of the board. Now, you should be worried about material, like it is one of the most important things as a beginner, but you should also be looking at your opponent's king and the king's safety. Now, this is a little bit more in the intermediate range of touch, but when you're looking at a king, if there's a king in the middle, and you'll notice there are a lot of open files, very specifically the D file and the E file are open for the towers here, you should be looking for a way to attack if you're very far ahead in material. Now, there's no way to simply trade off into an easy end game here, so that's not really in play either, just to keep in mind. So what I'm going to do here is I'm not going to take the pawn. I'm going to think about this position, and the move that I'm going to play is a simple move, queen to e6. Now, when I go queen to e6, I've lined up the double stack here with the queen and the rook, and I'm simply threatening to capture the bishop and checkmate the king on e8. The rooks also guard each other, so I'm not hanging a rook here, and black now has to find a way to defend this bishop on e7. So now we get to move rook to d7. Excellent move for my opponent, guards the bishop against the checkmate, and now I'm thinking to myself, I have the queen and the rook here. I would love to recapture this bishop and create the checkmate, but then the rook captures. So we're going to talk about the concept of removing a defender. Now, the defender here in this case is the rook, which guards the bishop. If there's no rook, I just capture and it's checkmate. So how do I remove this defender from guarding the bishop? Now, the way I go about that is I play the move rook ad1 here, and I'm attacking, threatening to capture the rook. If the defender of the bishop here takes my rook or goes anywhere else on the file, then this bishop is unguarded. So black has a real problem here with this rook on d7 in terms of trying to stop the checkmate. Now, there is one move here after which black still stays in the game. That would be the move queen to b5, guarding this rook on d7, because then once queen takes happens, the queen becomes the new defender of the bishop. So my opponent finds queen b5. Excellent move. He is defending quite well. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go knight to d4 here. I'm attacking the queen, but my idea here is to bring this knight ever closer to win this bishop on e7, and sooner or later this bishop should fall. Goes queen to a4, another very, very good move here. What I'm going to do is I'm starting to think about this position now. The knight is temporarily kind of under attack in the long run. Of course, right here, black can't capture as this defender is all that's guarding the bishop. So the move that I'm going to play is following another concept here, which is I'm going to play the move h3. Now, the reason I'm going to play this move is my king on the back rank. I have this luft for the king. Now, this is what's known as a back rank checkmate. If this pawn's on h2 and the king got stuck where there are no squares forward, that's just checkmate. When I go h3 here, what I'm thinking is the knight can't be captured because I win the bishop. So if the knight's not under attack here, then I'm free to play h3 and create the luft for the king. Now my opponent plays the move rook h7. So now this rook on h7 guards the bishop, so black is threatening to capture. Say I were to play a3, after rook takes d4, the other defender guards this bishop and not just the rook on d7. Unfortunately for my opponent here, now this is where basic tactics come into play, and when I look at this position, you'll notice here that I can play the move queen to g8, and this is simply a checkmate. Black cannot block with the bishop because then the rook captures the king, and the king has no squares available. So this is a pretty good game. This opening, I would say, again, at the beginner level, very tricky to play. My opponent played phenomenally well here. I mean, to play bishop d7, if you know this trick with white, then you'll get a winning position in this line. If black were to play knight e4, another move, you go queen to e2, attacking the knight. Knight moves, and after knight c3, you have bishop g5, you have knight to d5, and very quickly, white is bringing the rooks to the center of the board, and white is well on his way to a victory. So, pretty good game. I would not recommend this opening unless you're going to study it in depth, because even in the first 6-7 moves, there are a couple moves I played that I don't think are beginner quality. All right, so let's keep going. Let's play another game. Here we go. We now have the black pieces. So now we get to move pawn to d4. Now, in this game, I actually forget what I've played so far with black. I'm going to play the move pawn to d5. Now, I think playing these pawn pushes to d5 a little bit safer than a lot of other openings at the beginner level. We get h3. Now, I think my opponent's idea here is to go bishop f4 and bishop h2 a la a London system. So in my mind, I'm going to treat this like a London system, even though he played a rather funky move order. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go c5 here. Now, if your opponent plays bishop to f4, you can play c5 right away. So now my opponent takes. And now I'm going to play the move pawn to e5, creating the big black center while attacking this pawn on c5 with my bishop. Now, the basic rules about protecting material or not sacking in the opening don't really apply to these d4, d5 systems. White normally plays c4 here, and then you can play like e6, c6, or takes, a lot of queen's gambit type systems. But after h3, I figure, you know, what's the difference? If c4 is the best move for white and white plays h3, then I should be happy with this position. We get the move b4, white guards the pawn. Now I'm going to play the move a5, trying to undermine the pawn chain here, as these two pawns are very brittle. Let's see what my opponent chooses to play here. We get the move bishop b2. Now this is an excellent move here, attacking this pawn on e5. And the move that I'm going to play is, I'm actually not sure what to play, because the best move in the position is to play f6. I guess I'll play f6 because it fits with a theme. Like, normally you don't want to play this here, but I'm guarding the pawn, and more importantly, what I talked about in the last game is you want to be aware of this diagonal, but I always have this move g6 if white goes queen to h5. We get the move a3, and now I'm going to go knight c6, putting more pressure on this chain of 3 pawns here. Let's see what my opponent chooses to play. My opponent goes knight c3, and now he counterattacks my pawn in the center. So I could take the pawn on b4, but then white takes the pawn on d5. So I'm simply going to go bishop to e6, reinforcing the pawn on d5 and keeping this pressure on the pawn chain on the queen side. My opponent goes e3, and this move is a mistake. Now, my opponent has played pretty well. He's played some very, very good moves. Playing b4, playing a3, excellent moves. Knight c3, also an excellent move, ignoring the pawn capture to pressure d5. But now he finally makes a mistake with e3. Now, I think what my opponent misses, he simply forgot that the pawn here, after I capture, I'm attacking with 1, 1, 2. I simply win back the pawn, and after takes a knight b4, I have an extra pawn. Now I should be aware, again, queen h5 is now in play in this position, but after queen to h5, I have the move g6 here, and then the queen will simply have to retreat. So we got pawn takes pawn, and now I'm going to go rook takes rook, and then I'm going to trade the, or not trade, I'm going to take the pawn on b4, and once the pawn on b4 collapses, now the pawn on c5 is also extremely weak. You no longer have the chain of 3 to guard this pawn, and I should be well on my way to a victory. Get queen to a4, good move, checking the king and attacking the knight, and now I drop the knight back to c6. Now this game has definitely not followed a beginner game, just being completely transparent here, but I still think there's something that you can learn from this. I would also point out that I've said how pushing the f-pawn is very bad, but this also really highlights how, as you continue to improve at the game of chess, the situations become different, and there always are permutations. So like in this game, f6 was good because it protected the pawn on e5, but it's only good because I have g6 against the queen h5 threat. If I had a pawn on g5, for example, then queen h5 would win the game. And this is where, when the brain puts 2 and 2 together, it does make a big difference. So we get the move bishop to a3, excellent move, guarding the pawn on c5. Now what you will notice here is that both sides have not developed their kingside pieces. Both of us have all our 4 pieces on the king side on their original squares. So now I'm trying to figure out, how do I castle the king? Now knight to e7 or bishop e7 look very natural, but the problem is if I go knight to e7 here, how do I develop this bishop on f8? It gets stuck behind the knight and the pawn here, and then I'm struggling to castle the king. Now, if I go bishop to e7, the knight can still go to h6, and the knight can castle, which is why the move I'm going to play is bishop e7. Now, it's not going to happen in your games very frequently that you get this structure where white has a bishop and a pawn, preventing you from doing a natural bishop-knight development to castle the king. But in this case, I'm left in a situation where I have to put the knight here so I can castle the king out of the center. Again, normally you don't want to put a knight on the rim, but in this situation, I just have to get the king out of dodge and finish my development a la the basic principles. So we get bishop to d3. Now, this is a funny situation because you're probably thinking, well, why not go e4 and fork the bishop and the knight, right? It looks very logical. Pawns guard each other, you fork the knight and the bishop. But you always have to be aware, even at the beginner level, when your opponent plays a move like this, is it just a clean blunder, or is there a secret within? Now e4 would be a big mistake by me, because after e4, white has to move knight to d4, attacking the bishop on e6, and I cannot capture. I'll show it after the game, because if I were to capture, I would lose my queen. So if I go e4, knight d4, take the bishop, I then lose my bishop on e6 and lose the game as well. So I'm going to calmly castle, break the pin of the queen to the knight, and now I am threatening to go e4 to fork the knight and the bishop. We get the move castles, and now I go e4. Here, knight to d4, I would simply trade the knights off, because after knight d4 with the king on e8, I cannot play this move. But now with knight d4, my king no longer on the square, I can trade, take the bishop, and now I'm ahead materially. We get knight takes pawn, I take back. Actually, this is a good sack. I think my opponent wanted this initially because it looks like a double A battery. You hit the pawn and you're attacking the bishop, and it should be an uh-oh spaghetti-o moment. I actually missed this. I didn't realize you could do this, but as is typical of when I play games, I have this maneuver bishop to f5. Knight and the bishop guard each other. I cut off the threats on the diagonal, and now I'm simply ahead by a piece. Now my opponent has played a great game. I think he is underrated, to be fair. I don't think he's playing at a 700 level. I guess I should be lucky that I'm not either, but still, as I've said before, there's always something to be learned. We get queen c4, checking my king. I move the king and my knight guards the bishop. So after the capture, I still have a bishop and 2 knights versus the knight and bishop. So I have 1 extra piece. Now my opponent here does have 2 pawns. He's 1 2 3 4 5 6. I have 1 2 3 4. So 2 pawns are almost the equivalent of a horse or a bishop, which are both worth 3 points. That being said, in the long run, the knight should be worth more than the 2 pawns. So we get the move knight to d4. Now in this situation, white's king is very safe, right? There are a bunch of pawns in front of the king. There's no way to easily attack the king, but I still am in a situation where I want to try to attack potentially. Can I attack the king? Not really. So what I'm going to do here is, now I think about white's king, it's safe. There's no way to attack. We've both finished our development, and this is a situation where white is offering the trade of a knight. Now on top of offering a trade, you'll probably notice I have 1 2 3 attacking. White has 1 2 guarding. So white has actually made a blunder, because after I do the trade down, I'm winning a pawn. And also here in the end game, with the queens coming off the board, I will simply have an extra knight, and now it's just a matter of technique in order to win. I am trading down, which I've mentioned a few times already. Now when you trade down, it reduces the possibilities that your opponent has. In general, I'm looking at the position, this pawn, it's 1 2. King is kind of safe. I have the rook, which always is guarding against the back rank checkmates. So I'm simply going to take the pawn, offering another trade of the bishops here. And now material is evened out in terms of the number of pawns. You have 1 2 3 4, 1 2 3 4, even number of pawns. So I have a clean extra horse. So now I'm definitely happy to trade down. The only issue for me in this position to be careful of is not get back rank checkmated. So I'm going to play h6, create the luft, so the king has the escape hatch. And once I do that, there should really not be much danger left in the position. We get c4, and now I'm going to play the move knight to e5. Queen guards the rook, but now the queen and the knight attack this pawn on c4. So my opponent plays the move rook to b1. Very logical move to attack the pawn. Here I'm more than happy to trade down into this endgame. I'm going to lose the pawn at the end, but with a rook, a knight, and 3 pawns versus a rook and 3 pawns, this is, oopsies, he played the wrong one. He did the wrong order. Now I take the queen, he does a Botez gambit, and my opponent is going to resign. I'll probably still play h6 next move to create the lift for the king, so there's no threat, but with the lone rook, there's no way for white to checkmate anymore. My opponent resigns. Now the 2 things that I want to point out here about this game are, the first one here is that if I were to play e4, I tried to illustrate it, but some of you guys might not have caught on. You're forking the knight and the bishop. But when white plays the move knight to d4, even though the bishop can be captured here, I then lose my bishop on e6, and it's effectively an even trade. Now a lot will happen here, the game will go on, but it's an even trade. Now after knight d4, I cannot play knight takes knight, because if I were to try to capture here, I would lose this king on e8. So when I castle my king, white castle, and I go e4. Now if white plays knight d4, there's no king to be captured, so I'd simply trade the horses, take the bishop, and I have extra material. The last point that I want to make here is, in this endgame after takes, what I would play is h6, creating the lift for the king. It's not super easy to win this at the beginner level, but the main thing that you want to keep in mind about this is, just to illustrate the point, you want to get a rook to d2 and then try to force white to have to push these pawns with something like f3, knight f4 to win the pawns on g2 and h3. Now it's a very simplified explanation, there's a lot more to it, but I think the general point here is that the easiest way to attack in this position is, since there are no pawns on the edge, there's no ideas with pushing p or anything like that, you need to get this rook here and start using the rook and the knight to attack the white pawns near the king. Okay, so we have time for one more game. Let's do one more. Now in this game we have the white pieces, and I'm going to start out with the move, I'll keep going with e4. Now I think, again, like I said, all moves are playable, but I think if you're interested in more open positions, more aggressive, e4 is the best first move. If you're looking for more of a system type setup, a London makes a lot of sense, or like an English or a ready, those sorts of things are definitely playable. But if you want open positions, open diagonals, open files for the rooks, e4 is the opening you should play, or the opener you should play. So we get e4, e5. Now I'm going to go with knight f3 here. I think if we get knight c6, I'm going to play the Ponziani once again for a second time. We get d6. Now I'm going to do it anyway, because here I still have the idea of going d4 to create this big white center. We get the move bishop to g4. And now black has pinned the knight on f3. Now, as I mentioned at the start of this video as well, the pin with the bishop of the knight, whether it's this diagonal, whether it's g5 pinning on this diagonal, whether it's b5 pinning knight c6 or bishop b4, this is going to be the most common theme that you see at the beginner level. Now, the move that I'm going to play here is I'm simply going to go bishop to e2. Now, the reason I'm going to play this move, it might not be the best move in the position, but the whole point is to break the pin on the diagonal. So now, even if black were to play like knight d7, I can simply play d4 here or castles. There's no threat of making a blunder to lose the queen on the diagonal. Get h6. Okay, so now I'm going to castle. Why not? Finish the development. Next move is going to be d4 to build this big white center and take some space. In fact, I'm actually going to just pre-move it. I don't normally do that, but in this case, I will. So I'm going to pre-move d4. Now here black has 1-2 attacking the pawn, but I'm also guarding with 1-2. So in this position, black cannot capture the pawn without losing material. Now here already, I'm actually very close to winning, I think, because the ideas with e5 and queen b3 here to expose this long diagonal are very, very devastating. And my opponent is still a little bit behind in development here. You'll see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 pieces on their original squares. Here, I've castled my king already. And once again, I have very free development, moving the knight and the bishop. Now we get the move knight to f6. Now if I were trying to win this game really, really fast, I think if I were to play something like bishop to e3 and queen b3, it probably would end right away. I think I'm going to follow some more basic themes here instead of trying to win the game like a GM. So I'm going to go knight to c3, developing the knight. e4 pawn is guarded, d4 pawn is guarded, no big threats. Now, one thing here that you want to think about when you have bishops in general, and this is definitely in the intermediate range, is where do the bishops belong? Are there open diagonals? Can you force them open? And with this bishop on f3, the idea of e5 to force open this diagonal is a very serious idea. Now, the bishop on this diagonal is not terrible, but even if it goes to h5, the pawn on f7 is guarded, g4 does nothing. So the bishop really doesn't have a lot of scope. So we get the move d5. Now, this is simply a mistake here. I'm attacking this pawn with 1, 2, 3. So I take. I have 2 attacking. Black is 1, 2. So I'm going to win the trade. I guess my opponent can't count. He takes. I'm simply going to take back with the knight. And I want to go rook to e1 to expose the king before it can castle out of the center of the board. Hopefully my opponent doesn't simply resign here, but we could see that. So we get the move knight to e7. Now I could obviously trade down here with knight takes knight, but as I mentioned in the previous game, the king here is in the middle of the board. It's not castled to safety behind the pawn wall, and you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pieces on their starting squares. I don't want to trade down here. Now it is one way to win the game, of course, but I'm looking to attack. So I'm going to go rook to e1. Bishop still guards the knight from being captured, and the rook pins the knight on e7 here, and black is in dire straits with all these pieces on the original squares. Now when my opponent goes c6, he's hoping that I will trade the horses so he can castle. I'm not going to let that happen. In fact, I'm going to get really fancy. I'm going to go queen to a4, creating a double pin here with the queen and the rook towards the king. If black takes with a queen, I take with a bishop. So this is a very fancy double pin that I've set up here with the queen on a4. Probably not what I would recommend if you're a beginner. Just move the knight back and then just move this knight back and then play d5. But I'm going to go queen a4. Now we get move b5. I'm looking for a little trick. So the trick that I'm going to go for here is I'm going to go knight to f6 check, attacking the king. He has to take, and then I have bishop takes c6 checking the king. There's no capture due to the pin, so he's gonna have to block with the queen, and this is going to be very ugly. You can't take the bishop due to the pin. You have to go queen d7, so I will pre-move it, capturing the queen. Then I'll pre-move queen takes b5. I think there's a realistic chance my opponent will simply resign here, but let's see what he does. Okay, I take. He's gonna take the bishop. I'm gonna take the pawn, checking the king on d7, and now the main goal is just to bring the bishop, bring the rook in, and win the game. My opponent goes knight c6. This is a bad move as it walks into another pin here. The knight is pinned, so I can go d5, and here the knight is unable to move as he would lose the king on the diagonal. Also, you'll notice 1, 2, 3 pieces. Black has not finished development, not even close here, so the game should end very soon. We get king d6. I take the knight, and this is simply a clean checkmate. Now, what I would recommend for anybody watching this, when you're playing a game, if you're in a situation like this where your opponent has all these pieces underdeveloped and you're very close to finishing development, you need like 1, 2 moves here, definitely don't trade, even though this would be very good and you're up a piece here. In this situation, you can simply go a move like knight to c3, and when black plays say g6 to fianchetto and castle, you go d5, takes, and there are all kinds of threats here with the knight. Black's king is very, very bad in the center of the board, and the game will end very soon. Now, queen a4, of course, was very, very flashy to create the double pin here. Wasn't the only way to win, but I was looking to try and finish this game very quickly. So that's going to do it for right now. I hope you guys have enjoyed another video in our educational speedrun series. If you are not already subscribed to the channel, make sure that you smash that subscribe button below, and we'll keep bringing you all the speedrun videos, and hopefully in explaining more concepts as the rating continues to rise. Hope you guys enjoy it, and have a great rest of your day. Bye.